For those of your audience that know anything about body dysmorphia, it's one of the hardest chronic mental illnesses to treat. We have no actually specific interventions. We have, very broad range of tools in our toolbox to use for people with BDD. So we use SSRIs to help with their depression, and we use sort of, very, traditional kinds of psychotherapy like cognitive behavior therapy in a therapeutic situation, but we've got nothing. So that was a kind of long way to go. I'm sitting there at my desk 5 years ago going, there is nothing specific here for people with chronic body image problems.
Welcome to the Smarter Not Harder podcast, your home to 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host, Jodi Duval. On today's episode, we have a special guest joining us, Dr. Susan Rossell. Dr. Rossell is a leading clinical neuropsychologist and researcher based in Australia. She is widely recognised for her contributions to the field of cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychology, and mental health. As a professor of cognitive neuropsychology and director of the Brain and Psychological Sciences Research Centre at Swinburne University of Technology, Dr. Rossell's expertise lies in understanding the neural mechanisms underlying mental health conditions such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and anxiety disorders. In our conversation, we dive deep into the fascinating world of psilocybin. We explore what psilocybin is, how it works in the brain, and the changes that can be observed during a psychedelic experience. Dr. Rossell shares insights on the importance of safety, age considerations, and significance of set and setting, and the necessity of safety and professional guidance when exploring psilocybin. We also discuss potential risks and what could go wrong during psilocybin experiences. We explore the measurement of efficacy in psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, and she shares surprising findings from her research. We also explore the details of how psilocybin works in action and any differences Dr. Rossell has found in the use of isolated compounds versus traditional approaches. We also touch upon the intriguing connection between psilocybin and body dysmorphia disorder. Dr. Susan Rossell is a highly respected figure in the field of neuropsychology and cognitive neuroscience, known for her cutting-edge research and contributions to the mental health community. Her expertise and insights shed light on the transformative potential of psilocybin-assisted therapies. So, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Susan Rossell to the show. All right, welcome, Dr. Susan Rossell. Thank you so much for coming on the Smarter Not Harder podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Susan, for all the audience, and I will be doing an introduction, obviously, before this, and they will know all about you, but briefly tell us how you got into this current field and psilocybin, of all things.
Yeah, it was probably about 5 years ago now. I'm actually a body image researcher by, over the last 20 odd years. I am a neuropsychologist by background. I have worked on a number of different things in relation to body image, mainly, what are the mechanisms that relate to body image issues and how better to treat people with severe body image problems, especially things like body dysmorphia. So for those of your audience that know anything about body dysmorphia, it's one of the hardest chronic mental illnesses to treat. We have no actually specific interventions. We have very broad range of tools in our toolbox to use for people with BDD. So we use SSRIs to help with their depression, and we use sort of, very, traditional kinds of psychotherapy like cognitive behavior therapy in a therapeutic situation, but we've got nothing. So that was a kind of long way to go. I'm sitting there at my desk 5 years ago going, there is nothing specific here for people with chronic body image problems. And what I did was, I started to do, those kind of desperate things when we're trying to find novel kind of compounds, novel therapeutics. And I was just Googling. And I found a single case study from Hayes about 20 years ago, who had used psilocybin for one of his cases with chronic treatment-resistant body dysmorphia. Fabulous results. And then got talking to my colleagues. I was at a drug and alcohol conference with David Nutt, who's one of the pioneers in psilocybin research. And I was like, what do you think? You know, I'd read a lot of his papers. You've been using this with treatment-resistant depression. You know, we know that people with body image issues have massive problems with anxiety and depression. And he was like, I think it would work. So that's where I started on my journey into psilocybin. So part of those conversations with David Nutt, we both agreed that, you know, running a trial straight away in body dysmorphia was probably not the wisest of ideas. It was a novel intervention. It was a very, very novel intervention at the time. There was just some emerging work in depression. And suggested to me that he would let me see his protocols for setting up trials in depression. So that's why I set up trials in depression to start with, because the protocols were there, and this was so new, no one was thinking about it in Australia. And at least by having an international kind of supporter, we could get the trials for depression set up. Unfortunately, you know probably what I'm going to say then COVID got in the way, and everything kind of slowed down a little bit for us for the last few years, for a few years. But we're up and we're going, and we're running a large number of trials now in psilocybin, a very large one in for people with treatment-resistant depression, and we've just started to do our work in body image disorders in anorexia and BDD. So it was a very long answer. Sorry.
That was fantastic, because you answered my questions along the way, where I was about to ask you about the BDD and where you're at with that. So we can obviously dive a little bit more into there, because I want to dive into what psilocybin actually is doing in the brain and what you're finding out. So we can go into that. But I must say that you're a very busy woman, and we're just talking off air before what is going on for you at the moment, because it's a world first in Australia and the world is talking about it, and you are the lady and you're doing amazing work, and magazines and interviews and all sorts, and it's a tough time because you're trying to fit so much in, but it's a beautiful time because it's really leading the way, which is amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, some days I don't know whether I'm coming or going, but you know, it's good to be busy, I guess. I've really enjoyed talking to journalists and people that I wouldn't normally get contact with in my everyday work. You know, I am a nerdy scientist. You know, I do run a very big nerdy science lab, and we often don't get the privilege of talking to people in the general public, and actually really thinking about why the work that we do is so important, and it's been a pleasure the last few months.
Absolutely. It gives you a bit more of a motivational drive, I can imagine, just to know where it's going and how the impact is wide. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, the announcement by the TGA to downschedule psilocybin for major depression and MDMA for PTSD, I've talked about this a lot. I don't shy away from it. I think it was enormously premature. I don't think there is the research evidence for that, but that's what we've got now. So we've got a situation where there isn't the research evidence that there should be. And one of the examples I give is, take any cancer drug or, a cardiovascular drug or, asthma medication, and the amount of research that's had to occur through clinical trials, through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials before that's sent to market is substantially more than what we're seeing with psilocybin. So, your users, the people that listen to this podcast need to be made aware this is still a very experimental treatment. And people like myself are not saying don't go there. Well, because I wouldn't be doing the research. But what I'm saying is, there is so much we don't know, and it's the bit that we don't know that makes it a little bit scary for a lot of us. And I'm very honest about that. We need to have a lot more safety data, but at the same time, if everyone is careful and safe and listens and reads all the guidelines that are being put out by people like myself, then, we have the potential here to revolutionize treatment for some people with some mental illnesses. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. So, on that safety and we've spoken before about this previously, is that it's very important to get this right so the doors don't close again. And I think that's the key point here, is that we're trying to get it out there for a good purpose, and we don't want that to be taken away again. So I think that's really important for everyone to know.
Yeah.
But so let's start. Why psilocybin? Why is it so impactful on these specific conditions, and even wider than that? What have you found?
So one of the things that we know that psilocybin does, or most of the psychedelics, to be honest, there's initial brain imaging research, and actually there's the brain imaging research is quite consistent. So I think even though it's very limited, we're seeing the same patterns whatever psychedelic we're talking about, or whatever brain imaging data that we're talking about. And I like to give people a little bit of a context here. And I was doing some training only a couple of weeks ago. And when I gave this kind of the story to people could actually relate, could really understand, what I was trying to tell them. So when we're a kid, we're born with these brains, and these very kind of, immature brains that are open to experience the world. And as we start to learn things and experience things again and again and again, we habituate to them. So we don't need to pay attention to them so often. We've learned to path through life, and through those experiences and learning what to pay attention to and what to not pay attention to because it's not important anymore, we develop our thinking skills and our beliefs and our orientation through the world. But when we're a little kid, our brain's completely open to all experiences. And then when we become teenagers and then adults, we close that down. And we close that down for efficiency, because there's no need to take everything in all the time anymore, because we've got jobs to do and places to go and things to do. And we don't need to have all of those experiences brand new and sparkly every time. What seems to happen with people with serious mental health conditions, and I can give you examples like people with depression or people with OCD, they get very stuck in very rigid patterns of thinking. And they're not able to see alternate solutions out of that rigid pattern of thinking. So when you're depressed, I'm very sad. There's nothing meaningful in my life. There's nothing that's going to make me happy anymore. Someone with OCD, unless I engage in this pattern of thinking or in this pattern of behaviors, bad things are going to happen to me. They just forget. They get stuck. They get rigid. And there's a lot of writing on this, on people with serious chronic mental health problems becoming stuck or rigid. So what we're seeing is this extreme end of not needing to pay attention to new and novel thinking or new or novel experiences anymore. And this returns me back to the psychedelics. What psychedelics do for us is open our brains back up again. And they open us up like children, and we experience the world as new again. And when you look at things, when you look at the types of the experiences or transcripts or narratives that people express when they're on psychedelics, it's like everything is new, everything is sparkly. I can see associations between things that I haven't seen for years. I've got new ways of thinking, and people report this. And so that is what we are capitalizing on when we are giving people psychedelics. And we do it in a very specific way. So we aren't just giving people psychedelics and telling them to go and experience the new world in awe and wonder, because that's not going to be really very helpful to them. Because imagine you've been stuck for years and now you're having all of this novel information presented to you. We do it in psychotherapy. So this is one of the reasons why it's called psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. We let people have these experiences during what's referred to as a dosing session, and then we help them integrate it using very common psychotherapeutic tools like cognitive behavior therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, standard mindfulness, and integrate it, these new thinking patterns that they've learned from opening their brain up into their everyday lives.
Okay. So with that, when you're looking at the expansion and then the bring back in, so there's a few points that I want to ask you here. Mm-hmm. So first of all, my first question is obviously age limits for treatment is something that I'll ask you. We may get into in a minute. So that's one of my questions, because many people are outside of these major conditions that the research is currently being done on. I see even in my clinic, people who are constantly stuck in something in their life. So the treatment, the broadness of treatment may expand out in the future. Am I wrong?
No, you're completely right. It's like any branch of medicine or research, or you start with the most obvious, conditions, and people with depression and OCD and the people that we know are so completely stuck, and then we broaden it out, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to use it in body dysmorphia. But I was like I said, I was running a training course a couple of weeks ago, and I had the great pleasure of working alongside Renee Harvey, who is one of the pioneers of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And one of her slides, she had a list of like 40 conditions where psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy started, been used, and there's research, either already reported or commencing. So there's a very broad spectrum of conditions that we know that are probably going to be benefited by this intervention.
Yeah. And already on the street, you hear about things and supportive things, as with any compound or any supportive therapy, you're hearing all these stories already because people are trying these, whether it's legal or not. So that's obviously an experiential thing that you can base that off. So the actual neurochemistry surrounding what's happening when you're under a psilocybin treatment, I want to go there now and just have a little bit more explanation on what is actually going on for the brain within that. Yeah, so most of the psychedelics are involve the serotonergic system, especially the 5-HT2 receptors. The odd one out to that is actually MDMA. Actually, MDMA is a psychedelic, but it's just been put in the same camp. I can talk to you. That's actually for some of my nerdy pharmacy friends. I just know it's not a psychedelic and it doesn't interact on the 5-HT2A. It actually is. It has a major oxytocin release as opposed to the 5-HT2A. Yeah.
Some of them do have 5-HT1A as well, but it's the 5-HT2A that is responsible for the psychedelic experience and the dissociation. And essentially what it is doing to the brain, and for those of you in your audience that don't know anything about serotonin, it's a brain chemical. It is an important brain chemical, and it's involved in our mood, particular happiness. But also when it is so widespread, because it causes a flush through the system, a major flush through the system, and it makes us more responsive to our everyday world. And a lot of people, when they take the psychedelics, get this flush of awe, and they feel extraordinarily happy, and then they have, they're able to pay attention to the outside world more than they ever have done.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that can happen, though, and this is, I've spoken to you about this before, is that when that flush experience has happened, and when people start to perceive the world and that inner self in a more experiential way than they have done for an extraordinarily long time, it can cause a sort of a reflux to that, and it can cause anxiety and stress. So we need to be very, very careful about these psychedelic experiences, and that reaction, that stress reaction, is often referred to as a bad trip, and there's an awful lot coming out about these bad trips, and making sure that we provide a safe environment for people.
So yeah, it's that contraction back into the normal world is like, whoa, I experienced this, and this is just not how I want it anymore. Yeah. So that can be definitely a safety issue there.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously with these the compounds, and I want to get into obviously dosing, age, and specifics and everything like that, but there's different protocols around this that are, obviously here on the streets and all over the internet. There is so much information out on all of this. With the research that you're doing, are you only doing macro doses, or are you also doing micro doses?
So I am only interested in microdosing, so I dose at 25 milligrams. I have dosing days, where people go into a full psychedelic experience and they have the dissociation. They have that kind of interruption and that altered conscious state. There is, as you say, the internet is absolutely full of work on this, and the medical literature is full on research. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it would seem to be that very large dose and that dissociation from reality and that distorted consciousness and that going into a very kind of profound state is part of what the catharsis that is needed with psychotherapy. There is also, a reasonable literature on microdosing and, how to do microdosing and how many days a week. It's not something I'm desperately familiar with. I've obviously kept up to date with the reading broadly. I think when I read the literature and I try and understand, the results, I would say that the literature is kind of on the fence, I would say, about microdosing, and we need a lot more work. The macrodosing, the large doses with the psychotherapy attached surrounding it, both pre and post, do seem to be the ones that are showing the profound efficacy for some people.
It's that emphasis of larger treatment, obviously. And like you say, it's for the treatment base. When you've only got them for a short period of time, it's going to be the most effective and most controlled and safe. Yeah. So while we're talking about the actual dosing, differences between compound versus traditional, what's said about around this?
So look, the underground, I guess psychonauts talk about the importance of, natural substances, talk about the fact that they are potentially more effective than the synthetic ones. I work in medical research, so, for me, the synthetic ones are the ones that I'm going to get access to. We're still seeing positive, effects for some people. As I've said, not everyone has a positive effect. this is again where we come to, we need a lot more research. You know, I don't know thus far of a study that's been done head to head comparing a synthetic with a natural. All we know is there are some people underground that have, you know, compared them, you know, but then we're talking about an N of 1, you know, or an N of 2, you know, so who knows?
No controls whatsoever. And you can't do a side-by-side, can you? Because there's no controls in doing it on exactly the same person at exactly the same time.
Yeah, so, you know, so it's an unknown. It's really, that one is a real unknown.
Yeah, and I understand the importance of knowing the exact dosing, and it's very important when you're doing research and also treatment on people, because you don't want to be messing it up, and it's very hard to see that in a traditional sense of a mushroom.
Exactly.
You know, there's obviously, as you say, and a lot of people will be asking these questions, and I guess that's sort of why I'm bringing it up, because, you know, people are like, well, if I try this particular mushroom, you know, I've got a wombat here, or an albino here, or a penis envy here, or, you know, all these types of different mushrooms are out there at the moment. People are growing them in their kitchen and they're singing to them in their toilet. It's just everywhere, really, it is. So, you know, I guess also what you're doing is creating more detailed data and information for people, even if they can't get sessions. And I'm not saying not to, I'm just saying that the possibilities, like we said, had talked about, it's going to be in a very expensive treatment initially. So people are going to go elsewhere, you know, and I think you already know that, I already know that. So knowing the best and most solid information that they can, so they are also safe. I think that this is what this research is providing as well, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So age range, what are you looking at here in terms of legal age to actually start treatment on?
So, I mean, at the moment, that's really down to the medical regulations of Australia, which is 18 plus. You know, as I keep telling you, this rollout of this intervention is way too premature. We have no data. So, you know, that the research studies are all 18 plus, and of course I work in body image disorders, and you know, a lot of people with anorexia have body image disorders, and I've been asked probably once a week since the beginning of the year, can my 15-year-old daughter join one of your studies? And unfortunately the answer is no. And the answer is going to be no, probably a couple of years until the initial adult research on body image and anorexia, so BDD and anorexia, comes out. And if there is some positive signal, then there will be probably a few open label studies for especially younger people with body image issues. But at the moment, I personally won't do it. I just don't think we've got the safety data. I don't think and I always like to be extraordinarily clear about what safety data I am talking about, because I've been criticized about it a lot.
Absolutely.
We do have safety data in terms of, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world been taking psychedelics for an awful long time underground. We know that it doesn't cause cancer. We know that it doesn't cause cardiovascular disease. We know it doesn't cause any, you know, major disturbance to the major organs, your heart, your liver, blah, blah, blah. I am not talking about physiological safety data. What I am talking about is long-term psychological data. So we know that when people undergo psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and that there are some people that benefit absolutely, completely changes their lives. We know that there are some people it makes not much difference, but we also know that for some people they can have bad trips, and the trauma of the bad trip actually leaves them with more long-term psychological issues than when they started. And it's that long-term safety data for people that it made no difference and this was their last hope, or people it didn't make any difference and it actually made them worse and gave them some trauma. We don't know how that resolves. Like the longest long-term data that we have for people in clinical trials is 6 months. That is not long-term. This is not in the medical world. That is not long-term. I'm talking about people's recovery 1, 2, 3, 4 years later. We don't know, and until we know, one, what that long-term safety data looks like. And the second thing that I think is really important to add to this kind of metric is we need to know who's going to improve, who's not going to improve, and we need to have those predictors of response. You know, give us some algorithms, give us some metrics. You know, if you come in and you're a person that has X, Y, and Z versus a person that has A, B, and C, only the person with X, Y, and Z is going to improve. So I wouldn't give it to the person with A, B, and C. Yeah. Until we have all those algorithms and all that data, I'm not giving it to kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you obviously have the brain formation at a young age. We just don't know how that particular. No. You know, it blows me away about the traditional sense of mushrooms, and obviously the toxicity created around those mushrooms is, you know, how it creates its, you know, process. And then we're creating compounds out of that, and, you know, they call it toxic, but it's actually a, you know, beautiful compound that's creating this serotonin flush through the body. It's just such a fascinating medicine. But with all the research that had been done over the years, especially through MAPS, has there been no algorithms or metrics analysed from that at all? That blows me away. Wow.
Look, the Imperial group is starting to, and I've seen some of their response data and some of their, you know, machine learning data where they're starting to put together some of the metrics. But, you know, you need very, very large samples to run those kind of statistics. And, you know, apart from the new Compass publication in Psilocybin, most of them are actually, in terms of statistical kind of numbers, the numbers are too small.
Fascinating. Okay. So, you know, let's go on to importance of the actual treatment itself. You know, so we've got it coming. You know, I have seen a few people flying into all states of Australia to try and train some of these professionals. You know, what's the importance, obviously, not only the data that you were talking about in that long-term psychological safety data, but also for the actual professional guidance and how people are trained in that sense, and actually being able to support people properly through this without having, like you say, months or even years of research to even know what to be doing and what to match that with, what other tools you're going to be using through those sessions as well. So that's also another fascination of mine.
Yeah. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists just issued their memorandum today for their guidelines for people that want to be authorised prescribers. And a lot of the colleagues that I've worked with, because I'm a neuropsychologist by background, so a lot of my psychiatrist colleagues were actually working on that, as people that are currently working on my studies with me. So, you know, I was very aware of what was going to go into those guidelines. So we a couple of things to just tell your audience. So in terms of Australia, we don't actually have any accredited courses for psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy at the moment. The Royal College is not giving accreditation to any courses at the moment. The time period between the TGA announcement and the 1st of July was too short for them to review any of the courses, so there are none. They do appreciate the fact that there are other courses that are international courses that seem to have the material that would potentially, and they're very careful with their words, be the kinds of courses that might receive accreditation down the track. So although we don't have the courses, and they're not specifically endorsing any courses internationally, what they have suggested that they are going to be looking for in terms of what an authorised prescriber will be is people that do have experience with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy have potentially been to one of these international courses and definitely have been involved with a research study that has received HREC approval and has been received approval in terms of being a registered clinical trial in Australia. And at the moment, there's only been a handful. There's probably been, I think, 10 psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy trials in Australia. So it has to be one of the clinicians that's associated with one of those trials.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So, and the date is 1st of July. Is that right? So
yeah, it's Saturday. It's my daughter's birthday. So from Saturday. Look, and I would probably know 20 or so clinicians that I think, that I know are going to, set themselves up in private practice. But this is going to be so expensive. I can't see where the throughput of patients is going to come from.
I know. I would be fascinated how many people are booked in.
Well, nobody will be booked in at the moment because all that they're doing from the 1st of July is they're opening it up to receive applications. And for someone to make an application, they have to have HREC approval. And nobody will be able to get HREC approval within several months from the 1st of July. So all that they're saying is from the 1st of July, they will take submissions. Not that on the 2nd of July or even the 1st of July, people will be able to do this, because they won't.
No.
Because 1st of July, for example, is a Saturday, so it's not going to happen for the 1st of July. So from the 3rd of July, there will be nobody booked in. All that's happening is they will be taking submissions.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Rest assured, I'll be still searching out in a few months. Going.
Yeah, no. Look, I know it'll be interesting to see how people will have prepared submissions and what that's going to look like, because I can't see that it will happen for months, but prove me wrong.
Yeah, that's what I can say.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly got people going through our clinical trials as we speak. We just took a new delivery of psilocybin this morning, so we're doing dosing next week. But that's not part of this new procedure. This is an existing clinical trial.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so back to the research. What has surprised you the most about what you've found or what you've seen in recent research? Anything even that you just seen is like, wow, that's interesting, or that's different. I didn't expect that to happen. Have you had anything like surprises as such?
Yeah, and they're the ones that you probably your audience don't want to hear. The bad trips.
Yeah.
Bad trips really have upset me gravely. And, and you read the literature from the 1950s and 60s, and that's why the Nixon administration shut down psychedelics research in the 70s, because people were having bad trips and doing, killing other people and killing themselves and doing things that they wouldn't normally do. And I just thought it was a big ham-up, to be honest. I thought, there was some unscrupulous scientists doing, because, Timothy Leary was taking all of the psilocybin with all of his participants and, it was completely smashed all that. Let's just be colloquial about this all the time. And I just thought they were being shut down for bad science practices, not. Yeah, you read about bad trips, and you take them seriously, and you put as many safety parameters in place as you possibly can. But we had one of the worst cases of a bad trip just a few days before Christmas that I've ever heard of, and since from December to now, so 6 months, I have trawled the literature. And look, and it happens, and it's very hard to predict, and it's very hard to know how you're going to stop that happening.
And is there any particular metrics that you've seen, that you've noticed now out of even that particularly bad one, genetics or anything particularly? No,
because we just don't have enough data. We really don't have enough data, and so this is one of the things that then comes back to the TGA decision. We don't have data to predict response. So, we are going to get these bad trips. They are going to happen. And the other thing for your readers and your listeners to be very well aware of, when we're running clinical trials, we have these set of inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria that are really narrow. And this is because we're only still at phase 2 trials. So trials for any kind of compound, any kind of medical intervention have stages, phases, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is very, very early, and it often involves a lot of animal models and very experimental. And the patients that get these interventions are in hospital, so we can monitor them because we really don't know. Phase 2 is where we're at, and this is why this really upsets me in terms of rolling out an intervention. We're only at phase 2. And what phase 2 means is we know broadly it's not going to have any gross physiological side effects, but we still don't really know what's going on. We have no response indicators. We just don't know. And until we know that, this really concerns me about the rollout in the general public and the rollout for these authorized prescribers, because we have very, very, very narrow inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we know exactly the group that we're going to be testing and we're going to be taking through our clinical trial. People in the general public aren't going to do that. It takes hours upon hours upon hours to collect all of this inclusion and exclusion information. Most psychiatrists see their patients for 15 minutes. They aren't going to have time to collect all of this information. So more and more people with more and more unknown features are going to have this intervention, and we aren't going to be able to predict who's going to have a bad trip, which are awful for some people. Anyway, I go on about this a lot, but it does concern me because I don't want to have a generation of people with post-traumatic stress in the next 20 years because they've had a bad trip.
Absolutely.
They would seem to completely defeat the point of why we're trying to make this intervention work for people.
Absolutely. You'd have to follow up with MDMA to help the PTSD.
Exactly.
Maybe it's a double.
And it's just kind of like, so we caused the problem, so we'll give them something else.
Exactly. Yeah. We're just straight back to medical intervention there.
I was like, no. I mean, this is not why I went into mental health. I went into mental health to help people, and I've always made sure that we try and do that as safely as possible. And if we're not going to be safe, that really concerns me.
Yeah. And I completely understand that. And it's something that there's, like you say, so many more details are going to be needed to be supported here. What happens if there is a bad trip? What can you do to help support that person through that? What tools do we have that we're using, that we can be using while they're going through that will help support them so they don't get the PTSD afterwards? And then obviously what follow-ups do we need to do afterwards to then help support them so that's not going to be an ongoing problem? And did that still help them get through what they needed to get through, even if they did have a bad trip?
Exactly. All of those questions go through my mind constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely understand that, and I'm thinking that too, because you obviously want, and you see so many, as we've spoken about before, so many different medical interventions with pharmaceuticals that are still necessary, but they're still not touching the sides where we're talking about here. And that's what is driving this research, is because there has to be something else. We don't have it all yet. So it's something that's necessary, but also, as with pharmaceuticals, they come with risks. And I think that needs to be well understood. Yeah. It's not less. No.
Yeah.
So anything else around even your, BDD and anything else that you've heard, seen, interested with, on a lighter note, like, is there anything that motivationally drives you to really still be very interested in this because you see really good results?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we haven't started with the dosing for BDD yet. We're still finalising our protocol. In terms of BDD, and look, and I still give it an enormous degree of hope. And the reason I come back to again and again is we've not got anything that's working, and these are people that compared to a lot of the other mental health conditions that I work with, they don't have long-term cognitive issues like people with schizophrenia and bipolar and depression. Their memory's intact, their executive function's intact. They often have actually quite good occupations, but they are incredibly socially impaired. And they can do some real damage to themselves, engaging in, multiple plastic surgeries and cosmetic surgeries that don't work. They don't see the difference after they've engaged in all these interventions. They can often engage in self-mutilation, which is, just as bad. They engage in camouflaging. They don't have friends. Their relationships break down. And they have really quite good insight that they're engaging in all of this, and it's quite ridiculous, to people outside the illness. They know it's a ridiculous thing to think, they are aware. So, for this group of people that are growing, and that's the other thing. That I'm actually just about to launch any day now. I'm just waiting for some pretty flyers to come back. I'm actually about to launch a national body image survey to actually see what the prevalence of BDD is in Australia. And the reason why I am doing that is because when I first started working in BDD 15, 20 years ago, it seemed to be about 1%, and most chronic mental illnesses are about 1%, OCD is about 1%, major depression about 1%, etc., etc. But the latest kind of figures that are seen in Western literature is that BDD is now 2.4%, and we know the reasons for this. There's all this social media, people are staring at themselves all day on Zoom and Teams, and, yes, it, got big in the 80s and 90s in terms of body image with magazines, but magazines were, a paper copy and you might have one or two in your house. You've now got it in your house all day, every day, with social media and all the internet that we've got. And it is basically causing this influx of people with severe body image issues. So not only do I need to know how many people it is, then if I know how many people it is, I need to have an intervention that works, because nothing we're doing is working. And that's the thing that really concerns me. There are, when you look at the success rates for the standard interventions that are given to people with BDD, so we give them antidepressants to help with their depression, and we give them courses of CBT, and it might help about 30 to 40%. So we've got 60% of people with BDD are getting no relief from what we can offer them at the moment.
Goodness me. Yeah, I've noticed it in my practice too, a huge increase, and the age is decreasing as well.
It is, yeah.
Now, and I think I said this to you before, is I'm now noticing 8 to 9 year olds, which is ludicrous to me. It's absolutely ludicrous. And I feel like, when you have them sitting in front of you, again, you don't know. Obviously, there's referrals and medicines and supporting the nervous system and all these other things that we do. But really, you just feel like it's like psilocybin is almost like a slap in the face, isn't it? It's just sort of like shake them out of it. Like, come on. Yeah, so it's frustration that you have in the sense that how do you just shift this reality really fast for them? And psilocybin seems like it's such a good idea in that sense. Yeah.
If I was any of your listeners and I was, worried that my child and, someone under the age of 18 was starting to develop BDD, I mean, as much as you can probably get tantrums and a whole pile of it, I'd take away all their social media. Just take it all away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get them outside. Because as a neuropsychologist, one of the things I have done over my career is I've actually worked on the mechanisms for BDD. And I can give you a whole pile of reading about one of the most significant mechanisms that triggers BDD is the visual system. And what happens with people with BDD is they get stuck in what is referred to as featural processing. So when you're looking at the world, as you're looking at the world, one of the things that you need to do is you need to switch between looking at individual features, which is really easy on a face, so you look at eyes or nose or mouth, to looking at the whole. So you look at my whole face and, my background. And we do that unconsciously all day, every day. We look at, a pencil on our desk versus our whole computer screen. We look at the road ahead of us down to, our speedometer. We do it all the time. We switch between featural and configural or featural and holistic processing constantly. People with BDD are stuck in featural processing. So they only want to look at the minutiae on their face or their body. They find it that their visual system finds it incredibly difficult to switch into holistic processing. And so when I say, if you think your kids are starting to develop BDD, it's because they're looking at their screens all the time. They're not getting outside in the outside world, because as soon as we're in the outside world, we do that switch between featural and holistic processing a lot more often. Our brains are hardwired to do that switch constantly. And one of the things that we hear from people with BDD is they stop going outside because they're so concerned about people looking at them. So they're training their brains even more to be stuck in featural processing, and we want them to be switching between featural and holistic, because that's the way that we need to process the world to stop engaging in this very repetitive negative behavior towards ourselves.
Literally. And it's not only that, like as you're saying those things, I'm thinking about the issues with, and I'm seeing so many more eye and visual issues because of the lack of long versus long versus only short sighted.
That's right.
So I will always be telling my children too, I'm like, go outside, look at the hills.
Look at the hills. Go run, get in your bag.
Yeah. Or I grew up in the country. I was on a property. I would just run into, and go and find a tree somewhere and be looking out into the, dreaming and wondering. And it's just, we have none of that when we're in a condensed environment in suburbia. So yeah, that's made so much sense to me. That's amazing. But not only that is, and I'm happy to say this because I've tried the microdosing myself, but when I do some of that, my visual processing expands dramatically. And when you're saying that, I was thinking, I'm like, that's what it is. You actually start looking outside of yourself and things become so much more fascinating all around you and safe, is in awe. Yeah. That's in awe. Yeah. So it makes so much sense how that's going to be helpful and supportive towards that.
Yeah. And I'm not just giving people psilocybin. The psychotherapy component, and this is why we're still writing the protocol for people with BDD, is to get them to look at the bigger picture, stop being so inner focused, stop being so focused on individual parts of their body, go and look outside, be broader, people aren't staring at you is another one. Actually, one of the therapies that we have tried over the years and is actually quite helpful is just actually walking down the street with someone with BDD and then comparing your results to their results in terms of how many people looked at you both. And, it's always about one or two from my perspective. My patients, like everybody, all 100 people that I passed.
Wow.
And it's because and that is because they're so inwardly focused. They don't actually look to see whether people are looking at them. They just predict it's true. And it's a false prediction.
Yeah, so many things. We can just assuming so many, like you just think about your eyebrows, you're looking at everyone's eyebrows. You're going to go get your eyelashes done, you're looking at everyone's eyelashes. It's one of those like perceptual reality changes that we can make on a daily basis, but they have that all the time. All the time,
exactly.
Yeah. So, this could even be, obviously, you all know, this, but this is just my thoughts, and that obviously the listeners listening to this can obviously be thinking these things too, is that the minor versions of this, people stuck in an office, stuck in their work environment, so stressed out, and we know stress is huge in health conditions these days, and they can't see outside of that. They're so stuck in that they can't see any other option. That's their whole reality, and that's all that's stressful for them. So also these, obviously, we're talking about expansion of these types of therapies is going to help people move outside of those chronic stresses in their daily lives eventually.
Yeah. And, and I say to all of the people that come through our clinics and, friends and family that ask me all the time, you don't necessarily need psychedelics for this. Go to the beach.
No. Yeah.
Go to the top of a mountain. Go skiing. Go out on the water. Go and experience the everyday world. The vitamin D will do you the absolute world of good. Go with your best friends. The oxytocin will do you the world of good. Eat good food, because then that will properly increase your dopamine and your serotonin, rather than falsely through, any pharmaceutical compound. There are ways that you can deal with chronic stress that don't involve, very comprehensive, very, invasive interventions, like we're talking about. Doing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is not the easy way out. It's a very challenging procedure, and you can get the same sorts of effects by just challenging yourself with the tools that you have in your everyday world. Mindfulness and meditation is absolutely wonderful. Yoga, I think when people get in these very stuck thinking patterns, they think sometimes the medical intervention is the best way out. And I don't necessarily think for everybody that is for some people, absolutely, I think they're so stuck. But, just try some of these things that I've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of led me to really answered it almost, is that we always ask people at the end of this podcast is how can you live smarter, not harder? And I really feel that what you've explained is that we're not always looking for that magic pill. The magic pill is not going to be giving us what we actually need, and it's going to give so much more to actually experience these things, because, whatever happens on the outside when you're at the beach and you're meeting your friend, might see someone else and, create a beautiful friendship out of that, or anything can happen in those scenarios. It's always having that outsideward hope, but there's so many more simple things that we can be doing. We create our own brain chemicals that create these good feelings naturally, so why can't we utilize those? So anything you want to add to that, Susan, is how do we live smarter, not harder?
My last few sentences, that's how you can live smarter, not harder. But if you really, really are stuck and, you're stuck with a chronic mental health condition that, you've had for a very long time, I would hope that trying psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy might be an option for you into the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So where can people find you? I know you have a Twitter handle. Is that the best place to contact you?
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. Follow all your updates and everything on there. And as always, absolute pleasure. And I just love what you're doing, as I said already. But, I can't wait to see what comes out of all this process. It's all very exciting in the next few months to see what happens.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for your chat this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Smarter, Not Harder podcast. We are incredibly grateful to Dr. Susan Rossell for sharing her expertise and shedding light on the intriguing world of psilocybin. If you found today's conversation valuable, we kindly ask you take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred listening platform. Your feedback and support mean the world to us, and it helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on our latest content. We hope that this episode has expanded your understanding of psilocybin and its potential in transforming mental health therapies. Dr. Susan Rossell's insights have given us valuable perspectives on safety, setting, and the importance of professional guidance. As a wrap-up, this episode, we remember that knowledge is power. We are committed to bringing you 1 cent solutions to those $64,000 questions and appreciate your continued support and curiosity. Thank you for tuning in to the Smarter Not Harder podcast. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll be back soon with another insightful episode.